Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, it's been a rough week for the cloud. We'll run down the list and summarize the outages and explain what happened to the services that we all depend on so much. Plus, a big batch of your questions, our answers, and a rockin' roundup. All that and a heck of a lot more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 75, and we streamed it live on September 13th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com. I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com. You got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, man, 75 weeks in a row. The TechSNAP train continues on.
I was laughing at you last night when you were on the faux show and be like, it hasn't been a year and a half yet. Well, if you divide 75 by the fact that there are 52 weeks in a year, then...
Are you mathing me at the very top of the show? Wow, that's rough. That's rough. Now, we have, guess what, a big show coming up today. In fact, we have a kind of an extra expanded feedback segment, too, because we had to skip the emails last week since we were running late. And so we included a few extra emails in this week's episode. Pretty crazy roundup. And we have
lots of stuff.
Yeah, and we have a big news segment. So should we just get rolling?
Yes.
Get chewing through this stuff. All right, Alan, what is our first story this week?
Well, there's the biggest story on the internet this week, it seemed like anyway.
Definitely on our
GoDaddy
subreddit.
Outage.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Well, not just this, like it was all over Twitter, and it was affecting a bunch of ScaleEngine customers. And
yeah.
So the GoDaddy outage, there was a lot of claims and so on about it, and it was a little crazy.
That was crazy, because out of the gate, one of the first ways I actually even heard about it was I heard about it via Anonymous claiming they had caused it. And I didn't even see like news headlines. That was the first thing I saw out of the gate. Yeah,
and then basically the regular media actually glommed onto that and advertised it as fact when it wasn't. So, at some point on Sunday, which was the 9th, September 9th there, GoDaddy basically started dropping off the internet. Mm-hmm. In an outage that ended up lasting for almost 6 hours. It started around 10 a.m. Pacific, which is 1700 UTC, and they didn't get everything fully restored until 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 2300 UTC.
Okay.
So a Twitter account that only has like 2,600 followers or something, or only had at the time, came out and claimed that they were part of Anonymous and that they were taking responsibility for the attack, that they were launching a massive distributed denial of service attack against GoDaddy. The fact that people believed that without any kind of confirmation, or that the news started advertising a random tweet as fact, was kind of...
And this part of it sort of shares some parallels to our next story, too, so I won't spoil it, but it's interesting to watch this happen.
Yeah. And then some news outlets and blogs went further in their misunderstanding of how the internet works. And by not knowing exactly what a DDoS attack is, they reported instead that Anonymous had hacked GoDaddy.
Oh, nice.
Right? So there was a bunch of people running around with fear that their private information stored on GoDaddy or whatever, or that their password for their email and stuff had been compromised by Anonymous. This didn't happen. Right? So the CEO of GoDaddy came out and said that we've determined that the service outage was due to a series of internal network events that ended up corrupting the routing table for their Anycast network, which dropped all of their servers offline.
Wow.
So their servers were up, they just couldn't reach the internet, or rather the internet couldn't reach them.
I think part of the reason this kind of made a big splash is because GoDaddy really doesn't, I don't really know of any other prior outage from GoDaddy. And it's funny because we've seen now a lot of big outages. Like I recall the East Coast Amazon EC2 outage ended up being the result of some routing failures that then led to other issues. This is sort of becoming a common thing we're seeing.
Well, the funny part was just the number of people being like, "Oh, how come they don't have redundancy?" It's like, well, they do, but redundancy doesn't do any good when someone makes a typo.
Well, when you can't route to it, and I think
when the routing change gets distributed to all of the redundant copies, right? So having a redundant router is great if your first router breaks, It isn't great if you configure the main and the redundant incorrectly.
Right. Which, if you're mirroring their configs for redundancy purposes, that might be likely to happen.
Basically, you need the whole idea with routing configs is that you get convergence. All of the routers have the same config. Otherwise, they end up routing in loops and stuff.
So, do you think this likely indicates there was some sort of change management process that failed? And
likely, and they said they put systems in place to make sure it doesn't happen again, and so on. Like everybody says every time this happens.
But this is particularly one of those problems where there's not really a direct technology solution to this, because if you typo something in a routing table, that's just going to happen. If you put the wrong IP address in there, there's no system, no technology to fix that. So you have to do it through a means of, all right, if we make the change here, we have to test and validate before we deploy the change here. Now, of course, they likely know that, but it seems like maybe
a person of at least this level must review your changes and sign off on it, so that there's no one person that can be responsible for it. It has to be, 3 people have to have failed to notice the typo before it goes live.
Alan, a breaking news story in our jblive.tv chat room. Mr. Mango is claiming to be a member of Anonymous and is claiming to have hacked JupiterBroadcasting.com.
Right.
Uh-oh. All right. Well, hopefully that doesn't spread like wildfire. Any other thoughts on this one?
The issue was compounded because the downtime affected not just people that use GoDaddy for their hosting, but people that use GoDaddy for DNS, which is a lot more people use GoDaddy for DNS than they do for just hosting, right? Mm-hmm. Mostly because the DNS is a free service you get when you buy the domain, and hosting is something you buy separately.
Yeah.
So while GoDaddy hosts about 5 million websites, which is a lot of websites, they manage 52 million domains, and a lot of those they provide the DNS for. So, for example, the DNS for JupiterBroadcasting.com is actually hosted at GoDaddy. While the site is hosted at ScaleEngine, Chris left the DNS at GoDaddy because it was easier for him to manage it that way. To have all those domains in one place instead of having the couple that are hosted with ScaleEngine on our control panel that's different and that he's going to forget his login to.
Right.
But because those DNS servers were unreachable, viewers couldn't look up the IP address of JupiterBroadcasting.com in order to reach the site at ScaleEngine. So it made it look like the site was down for some people. Mm-hmm. Now, DNS caching helped reduce the effect of the downtime somewhat, especially if the site was very popular, so it was already in the cache, or if you are at a very large ISP such that other people have been to the site while it was working to populate that cache.
Right.
For example, at the time when I wrote this article a couple hours ago, I randomly looked up JupiterBroadcasting.com's DNS at Google Public DNS.
Yeah.
Basically, at GoDaddy, the TTL for your domain is set to 1 day. So once Google looks up the record, it doesn't need to look it up again for 1 day. When I looked it up at Google, but again, because Google uses Anycast, I was looking up at Google closest to me. Someone that looks up from Google somewhere else will get a different result.
Right.
But basically, the TTL that was left was about 28,000 seconds. So that's, about a quarter of a day.
Yeah.
So there was about 6 hours or so left in the TTL. So if the downtime were to start right then, when there was 6 hours left, if they came up before that 6 hours was over, I would never notice that the site was down if I was using Google DNS.
Right.
If, however, the cache had been shorter, it may have worked fine for the first 2 hours, but then after, when the cache expired, when Google tried to look it up again from GoDaddy and GoDaddy was down, it would not be able to look it up.
I would say, considering how large GoDaddy is and how popular they are, in terms of not being site availability, I really never experienced any sites that I couldn't reach. I think the whole DNS caching system worked pretty well in this circumstance.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that experienced issues, though.
Oh, were there? Okay.
Yeah, partly because, not everybody's at a big SP that's going to have looked stuff up. And we saw a drop in our biggest customer, Enrelate, which is an advertising plugin. They saw about a 40% drop in their traffic for a while because their DNS is also hosted at GoDaddy.
Oh, really?
Even though they have their own servers for their main site, and they use ScaleEngine CDN for their images and JavaScript and everything. Mm-hmm. But they manage all the DNS in the control panel at GoDaddy. Mostly because a full Anycast DNS system with as much scale as GoDaddy has costs quite a bit of money. Like if you get something like DNS Made Easy, which is another DNS provider we've talked about a bit before because they have features like automatic failover. Their system, they charge you for every million DNS queries. And so if you're a very large site that's getting a lot of lookups all the time, then that can start to add up to thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And, GoDaddy provides it for free.
Yeah. Geez, I didn't even realize.
But anyway, when I checked, so Google had it cached, but when I checked OpenDNS, the OpenDNS node closest to me didn't have Jupyter Broadcasting cached.
Really?
So the first time I looked it up, it had a fresh, full day of cache. So if I had tried to use OpenDNS in my area when Jupyter Broadcast or when GoDaddy was down, I wouldn't have been able to reach Jupyter Broadcasting. Also, on top of that, your computer has its own DNS cache, although it's usually much shorter.
Right.
And sometimes your browser has its own separate DNS cache.
And many of us, and many of those in the TechSNAP audience likely have a pfSense server with DNS loaded on it.
Yes, although most times that is set to just act as a forwarder, not to actually do recursive DNS, because doing full recursive DNS is slower.
Right.
Because you'd have to look up ., and then .com, and then so on and so on. And your ISP already has a hot cache and why not use that? Mm-hmm. Anyway, prior to this event, GoDaddy had maintained a 99.999% uptime for DNS services.
Oh, there you go.
So 99.999% is what we in the industry would call 5 nines.
The 5 nines, Alan.
Yeah. And to do the math for you for that, to maintain 5 nines, that means that the total cumulative downtime in an entire year has to be less than 6 minutes.
That's tough. That's tough.
Now, if you compare that to 4 nines, that means your total cumulative downtime for a year has to be less than 53 minutes.
That's easier. That's easier, but still tough.
Yeah. And then when you get down to just 99.9% uptime that a lot of places claim, that allows for up to 9 hours of downtime.
Yeah, I got that at the
Even
back.
that's spread across the whole year.
Yeah, exactly. That
means less than an hour a month.
Yeah, that means one bad weekend, or and you spent
one bad afternoon.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, your 5 nines have turned into 3.
Yeah. And I was pleased too that this morning I had an email in my inbox that said that I'd be getting a credit applied to my account, which I thought was really cool. So they've sent out emails to people who are affected by the outage, and you can redeem the credit and apply it to your account if you.
That's very typical. Like DNS Made Easy has an SLA like that as well. It's
just a nice customer service thing to do, especially when people rely on your service to.
Yes, although often with better type of ISP and so on, it'll be part of your service level agreement where it's not a courtesy they're giving you in this one case.
Right.
It's guaranteed. For example, the hardware SLA I have with some of the places where I rent servers is that in the event one of the hard drive dies, they will replace it within 4 hours. If they fail to replace it within 4 hours, I get 5% of my monthly fee for that server refunded for every hour after 4 that it takes until they replace the hard drive.
And that's not too out there for higher end services or like data center internet services. They have an SLA.
For Pier 1, where we have our racks of servers, they provide a 100% network and 100% power uptime.
Right.
If for any reason if the power goes out for any reason, they owe us money. Quite a bit sometimes.
But it's nice to see. Nice to see.
We had one. I think it was in like an 8-minute outage or something at Pier 1 because some customers' spanning tree algorithm in their switch had too high of a priority and it broke something. Basically, somebody managed to configure the switch in such a way that it got around the protection that Pier 1 had to prevent customer switches from interfering with their core switches.
Yeah.
I ended up getting a refund for a couple of $100 because of that.
Nice. There you go. It's nice to see that being done in the consumer space. I give props to GoDaddy. Now, of course, the thing is, in situations like this, people remember these kinds of things, and so you sort of spend a certain amount of consumer goodwill here with this kind of stuff.
Well, you remember when Rackspace had their outage, it was before we started doing TechSNAP, I think.
It's like just before, right?
I think. There's an article on my blog about it on appfail.com, but they ended up giving like $1.2 million in refunds because of a couple of hours of downtime.
That's expensive.
Because, people spend a lot of money at Rackspace because of the uptime guarantees.
Right. I read that the last EC2 outage that Amazon had, they their running cost was $1 million a minute that they lost, according to them. Because if their back-end payment system goes down, that's how much it costs them per minute. That's how much business costs.
That's how much Amazon.com lost because of the failure of Amazon AWS. It doesn't even count the people that use AWS and the hours of EC2 instance time that didn't get billed and so on.
Yeah. It's crazy. Welcome to the cloud. All right, Alan. Well, any other thoughts on?
Yeah, a little bit. So GoDaddy uses what's called Anycast for their DNS. And that means that even though when you set up your domain like jupiterbroadcasting.com, if you do a whois on it, you see it only looks like you have 2 DNS servers. It's like ns1.godns and ns2.godns.net. But those 2 IP addresses are actually anycasted, meaning that there are multiple servers all over the globe that possess that one IP address. And then the global routing table sends you to the closest one from wherever you are. So basically, if I did a trace route to those addresses from a couple of my servers in different places, they would end up in different places, which is not what you normally expect with a single IP address. And so that's how they can provide the redundancy and the better speed and also the scale that they need. But in this case, when the problem was their routing tables, it meant that nobody could reach those IP addresses anymore. So because of what we assume was human error or some problem with some automated system, the routes that GoDaddy broadcasts out to their upstream providers so that the rest of the world can find them were in some way incorrect, causing the traffic to no longer reach the GoDaddy servers. And this affected not just their DNS, but it was also affecting customers who use GoDaddy for their email and so on. So Anycast is commonly used in DNS, but it's not as often used for TCP-based services because of the fact that the way Anycast works is if a server goes down, you withdraw that route, and basically that IP address all of a sudden points to a different server. Well, if you had a sustained connection, it would end up being disconnected, right? Like if you were in the middle of loading a file off a website, if your acknowledgement of a packet or something, or your attempt to connect or to continue a session goes to a different server where they don't have their side of that session, right? That port's not open. Then they're just going to be like, "Who are you?" And I'm not in the middle of a conversation with you.
Yeah,
right? It'd be like if you and I are on the telephone, and all of a sudden it switched it so you were connected to somebody else.
Yeah.
Chat room, or they wouldn't know what you were talking about in the middle of your sentence.
Right.
And so you don't see it happen for TCP that often, but it's very popular for DNS because it's a UDP-based thing, and it's question and answer. So it doesn't matter if the route changes at all. Although there has been some success with using Anycast for very short-lived TCP connections, where the chance of that a switch happening in the middle is very low. We've talked a little bit about that before when we talked about what Anycast was on one of the Ultimate Home Server type episodes.
Okay.
And there's a link for some extra coverage from datacenterknowledge.com, which has a little bit slightly less edited version of the raw information.
Data Center Knowledge is a great site.
Because the people there, as opposed to some of the primary sources, which came from more mainstream news, although I think our main source is Ars Technica, so they're better. But a lot of when it's reported by like NBC or whatever, they don't know what a routing table is, and the CEO obviously doesn't know that much about a routing table because the way he phrased it isn't correct either.
Yeah.
So when it was reported through datacenterknowledge.com, there was less chance of anything getting mangled.
Yeah.
See, that's a problem I always have with the news reporting on a lot of this stuff, that especially when it's highly technical like this, is that by the time it gets through the PR people at the company that's reporting the problem and through the news people at the company that's reporting it to us,
it's been translated, quote unquote.
Yes, it's been dumbed down so many times that it's not necessarily correct anymore, and that all the good technical detail is missing. And sometimes, I wish that the companies would put out a little bit more of the technical details on what happened. But a lot of times, they're, not that keen on giving out that much detail to even their customers. Some of the companies I deal with are pretty good about that. Like that Pier 1 issue that we had, they didn't know what the problem was immediately either. And so about 2 days later, we got a report called an RFO, reason for outage, and it described in all the technical detail what happened, why it happened, when it happened, whose fault it was, what they were going to do to fix it, and all the stuff you would expect.
They did a summarized post on the GoDaddy blog, or the GoDaddy News Center that sort of more directly describes what happens. So if people want to read some of the details, they have to
look at that. We should throw a link to that in the show notes.
All right, I will. So interesting times, Alan. Interesting times. Any other thoughts on that one?
Not really.
All right.
Interesting thing, if you was that GoDaddy's interface allows you to actually export your DNS records in the form of a bind config file.
No kidding.
That made it much easier to move one of our customers that requested to switch to Scale Engine DNS servers.
That is really slick. So you go into the control panel to do that?
Yeah, you go into the GoDaddy control panel and you can export all your records in the format I need to just drop them on a name server.
I like that. I like not being locked in.
They also have it in a couple of other formats that may be useful for stuff as well.
So,
including like plain text, which is just nice to have a backup.
Well, let me ask you the transverse too. Do they do import?
I don't know, but I would imagine possibly.
Because that could be handy too. That's worth. I did not even know about that. That's something I might dig into. All right, Alan.
I didn't know either, because a number of times I've done it manually, and now I'm kind of like, why did I do that?
Should we go on to the next story in the news? All right. Now this one's pretty interesting because I can't quite bring myself to just believe it, Alan. I'm just shocked. Anonymous might have been misleading us again on this one.
We don't know either way. It's all very cloudy, but yes.
So what happened? What's going on here?
Security researcher named David Schutz, I'm guessing I'm pronouncing that right, was analyzing the data that was posted online during that from Anonymous, which was 1 million Apple UUID records attached with some personal information on some of the records, found that an unusually large number of devices mentioned Bluetoad in some way. And so when he started looking up, he found that Bluetoad was a company that makes iOS apps for publishing companies. And he basically found that 19 out of the 1 million records referenced Bluetoad, which seemed like an unusually high number for this data to be from somewhere else. So he contacted Bluetoad to report what he had found, and Bluetoad came out and said that we checked that posted file against our database and found that it matched about with a 98% accuracy to our data.
Right.
So likely it means that the bits that didn't match are because those records are newer or have changed since when the data was stolen.
It's good of them to be honest about it, and they obviously were in the database more since they had devices for their company doing software testing.
Right, and that's why their name popped up in the database so many times.
Yeah.
The researcher also said that he couldn't conclusively say if Anonymous's claim that that they got the data from the FBI was true or false. Because
wait a minute. Why wouldn't he know if the FBI has their data records? Like if the FBI got his company,
he doesn't know whether or not Anonymous stole this database from the FBI or not.
Oh.
So even telling that the original data came from Bluetoad doesn't mean the FBI didn't have it and that's where the Anonymous stole it from.
I assumed when I saw the story they took it from Bluetoad directly. But
well, that's
I guess that doesn't mean that at all, does it? That might not be the case at all.
It might. It seems most likely case is that's what happened. And Bluetoad says that in their forensic analysis, they claim that it shows that the data had to have been stolen within the past 2 weeks, which rules out the Anonymous claim that they stole it from the FBI in like March or April or something.
That's right. Yeah.
But we don't know for sure. There's no conclusive proof that we've been shown either way. Although, the least complicated explanation is likely the truth. But we don't know for sure. Again, the amount of detail in the original Anonymous thing seemed fairly specific. Like, they mentioned the specific FBI agent who they stole it from and where else he worked. They mentioned which vulnerability they used. They mentioned the name of the file, and that name correlated to information we know about data sharing with the FBI from our previous research into CISPA.
Right. That's right.
And they mentioned the type of laptop that it was. They specifically mentioned
that's a lot of detail
and stuff. Yes. And
it all actually matches up too. It all kind of makes sense.
When I had only seen the headline and before I had read the article about Blue Toad and so on, my assumption was that Blue Toad was the company that was giving the data to the NCTFA or whatever it's called, that was giving the data to the FBI.
Well, don't you? Yeah. I mean,
that was my assumption before I had more facts.
So you think Blue Toad voluntarily handed it over?
Possibly. And again, remember the FBI statement saying that they didn't try to find this data, or they were it was very odd, the wording that they chose to use in their press release. But they never said that they didn't have the data. They just said that they never went out looking for it. Or
we can't confirm or something.
Yeah, it was kind of dodgy. Although they could just be them basically giving a non-answer answer.
They are kind of dodgy.
Yeah. So it's hard to say. It would take a little bit more research to try to figure out, is the claim that the data is only 2 weeks old true or not? Because if we can prove that it was older than that, then the FBI story looks more likely. If we prove that the data is definitely from the last 2 weeks, then the FBI claim is pretty much out the window. So it's hard to say.
That might be possible. Somebody would have to have a device that they knew was of a certain age and see if it was in the database, I guess, right?
Yeah, basically.
Well, maybe we'll find out.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see what develops, but we don't know. The other thing is Blue Toad is a company that makes apps specifically for publishing companies.
Okay.
And apparently, they have a lot of customers. Apparently, their app is installed by a lot of people, or likely the multiple apps they make are installed by the same people a lot. But publishing companies have long been known for collecting as extensive data about their readers as they can. Like magazine companies want to know everything they can possibly know about you, right?
Yeah.
So they can
market
to the advertisers in the magazines and so on.
And it simply just comes down to the more effective advertising they do, the better return their advertisers have, so the more likely their advertisers continue to buy advertising.
Yes. But, also, I had a discussion about this topic with Matt from Coder Radio, and he was talking about how
Mike.
Companies, is it Mike?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sorry. From that companies like Blue Toad make a lot of other app developers look bad because they're collecting all this data about their customers in a way that most of this data isn't normally given to the app unless the app goes out and tries to get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he made a correction about the way I phrased it on last week's episode of TechSNAP, was that just because you buy something from an app doesn't mean the app gets all that data. The app has to specifically try to get it from your phone.
Yeah, and he also made the case that it's more likely that applications that have advertising in them are more likely to do those kinds of things.
Yes.
And apparently he also...
Actually, the free apps with advertising are more likely to do unsavory things with your data than an app you actually pay for.
And I think the awareness level should be raised on Android. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, on the Linux Action Show, I did an Android app pick from AppBrain that will scan your Android device and find ads that kind of act a little more like spyware. That kind of look for tracking stuff, and it will identify all of the apps on your phone that have that kind of stuff. So it's on AppBrain, but if you just go look for the past few weeks of Linux Action Show, you'll see a link to an app that'll do that for you. Because I think it's worse on Android than... The one thing Apple has done is they've gotten more and more judicious about this kind of stuff.
Part of that is just that their infrastructure has been around a little longer, so they've all this stuff's been tried on them before. But both.
And to be frank, Alan, I think it's more in Google's
should do a better job.
It's more in Google's business interests to allow a little more sophisticated ad tracking. I mean, that's just how Google makes money.
Partly, yes, but also just Google is less picky about apps in general.
Yeah.
And that's part of that is the advantage of Android is the fact that what apps you can choose to install is not censored by Apple.
Right.
It is in the other ecosystem.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And all the good and bad that comes with that.
But mostly that means that you have to use your own judgment to decide what apps you install.
Just like you do on a real computing platform.
Yes, it's like I don't want to live in a walled garden.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want somebody making choices of what applications I can install on my computer, right?
Yes, and
that sounds crazy to me. That concept.
Yeah, well, then looks like where we're headed in a couple of different places. With like the Windows App Store and the Mac desktop App Store.
Don't get me started, Alan. I sound like an old codger when I start talking about that stuff. I start telling people to get off my lawn, and it's awful. It just turns into a nightmare. Hey, any other thoughts on this story?
Nope.
All right. I want to talk about two quick things before we jump into the feedback. First of all, I want to give a plug to the affiliate systems that we use here at Jupiter Broadcasting. This is a great way for fans of our shows to contribute to the network when they get themselves something. We have links at the bottom of the Jupiter Broadcasting website for Amazon US, UK, and of course DE, Netflix US, and Newegg is awesome. And we've had more and more people buying machines on there. That's great. We have ThinkGeek on there, Audible, and Code School if you want to learn by doing. And GameFly. We also have Chrome and Firefox extensions, which automatically enable our affiliates when you're shopping on their sites. You don't have to think about it. And here's what's cool. Rikai, the creator of the extensions, just put those bad boys on GitHub. And so if you have a feature request or a bug fix suggestion you want to make, or do some code yourself and you want to go in there and maybe add some features, it's available now on GitHub, and it'd be a great way for the community to help us continue to generate revenue. And one of the other ways we generate revenue is by our longtime sponsor, GoDaddy.com. And GoDaddy is back this week with a brand new deal for the TechSNAP audience. And that is $5.99.coms. Oh, yes! Oh, yes! Yep. And you can also get 3
with free DNS hosting.
That's right. And you can also get 3 additional .coms for $7.99. But if you're going to buy a .com...
only the first one's that cheap. That price is so good, you can only have one.
It's true. But even $7.99 is still a really good deal for a .com.
It is.
It's like the .com has become like this rare commodity.
Yeah, well, I remember when they were $70 for 2 years.
Yes. Oh, my gosh, yes. That was actually that was GoDaddy's one of the breakthrough things GoDaddy did is they brought it to the regular humans.
Yes,
they brought it to us humans.
Although part of the thing that lowered the barrier for me was I finally got old enough to use a credit card.
Yeah, that helps too, doesn't it? That does help.
I remember before that, I had to find a registrar that would let me pay via money order.
Right. Now, if you have access to a credit card and want to get yourself a .com, use our code. You ready for this? 599tech. 599 tech. And
nice.
When you check out at GoDaddy.com, you get a $5.99.com. Thank you to GoDaddy for supporting the TechSNAP program. And a fist bump goes out to our fellow sysadmins that work at the GoDaddy Knox. I'm sure you guys are working overtime these days, so we feel you, brothers.
Well, it's Thursday now, so they're probably back at work, but I'm sure that Monday they were all sleeping it off.
Yeah, that's a rough Monday morning, that's for sure. All right, so thank you to GoDaddy for the long-time support. Use our code 599tech when you check out over at GoDaddy.com. All right, Alan, what do you say we jump out of the news segment and we go do some TechSNAP feedback? And thanks for sending your feedback to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or using the contact form, which is linked at the top of our website, or sending in your submission to our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, which is where our first batch of feedback came from this week. Alan, sir, are you ready for the first email?
Yep.
All right, this one came to the subreddit, and it's actually just a fun suggestion. All right, Alan, are you ready for this? Brace yourself. It's a TechSNAP drinking game. Every time Alan says, basically, you take a shot. Or there's even a last variant. Every time Chris says Itakaza instead of Didakaza, the problem is I'm going to get people drunk just reading this part. Didakaza, as in Miguel Didakaza, you take a shot. And I think this could be expanded upon, really. I think there's a lot of other things that, as tropes, people are saying a boot. Every time Alan says a boot, they could take a shot.
I don't say a boot.
Or when you say ZFS, if you'll take a shot.
Yes, ZFS. ZFS. ZFS.
Now that we've drawn
Are you
attention,
drunk yet? ZFS.
now that we've drawn attention to it, people are going to notice all the time. All right, well, that was just a fun one. Now, this next one, Alan, I don't know how deep you want to go into this. I don't really care either way. It was submitted to the subreddit suggesting that we do a Server 2012 review on the show. I was thinking it'd be fun if TechSNAP reviewed Windows Server 2012. This is Gamerman733. Last gets Linux distros reviews, and I think since TechSNAP is about server administration, this would be a fair topic for them to cover. Now, in the thread, we got a few naysayers who say that you and I probably are not the best equipped to review Windows Server.
It depends. I was fully versed in Windows servers at one point.
Yeah.
When I started out, I was mostly doing Windows stuff, and I've taken all the classes on it, and I ended up teaching those classes for a while as well. But admittedly, I haven't done anything with anything newer than Server 2008, and most of my experience is actually with 2003.
A lot of it's still
the whole basic Active Directory stuff. I've got all that down, although I lack a bit of experience with some of the more enterprisey stuff, especially the enterprise licensing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And the pushing the Windows updates to the machine, the WSS. WSS. I don't have much practical experience with that, mostly because I've never really worked in more of a enterprisey type environment.
Yeah, but at this point, your career...
The enterprise environment, the last enterprise environment I worked in was Windows NT 4.
Okay.
But
I also got started in the industry actually for Windows. In fact, my first job at a bank that I worked at was because I was their best Windows admin. Like, they were all Novell and DOS guys, and they needed somebody to convert them from DOS and Novell to Windows. And it wasn't actually until the Windows servers weren't capable of the demands of the network that I actually even looked into Linux and FreeBSD. So I started with Windows, and I've always kept, because of that, my hand and feet in the Windows camp, being in Washington, literally in Microsoft's backyard. Windows is big here. A lot of small businesses here want to just buy local, and so they want to go Windows. They don't want Linux.
Well, most small businesses want Windows, period. And that's why my experience with it was still that way. And yeah, it's we've basically, I found though that anyone that's good with Linux can quickly catch on to the way Windows does stuff, because they have a better grasp of some of the underlying concepts, the stuff you don't even see, the stuff you don't see on Windows. But when you learn how to do it on Unixes like Windows or on Linux and BSD,
you can translate
it. The Windows one is just doing the exact same thing with a bunch of candy coating on top. And sometimes the Windows way might even be easier, but having that more low-level understanding of what's actually happening there.
Yeah.
So basically, Unix admins make better Windows admins as well.
There you go. I've
although they mostly hate Windows and try to avoid using it.
So I'll say, I've spent a limited time with Server 2012. I have it deployed here at my house. I'm setting up a machine for a client, and it's not bad. And I've set it up at another client's, and again, they're not using it for anything major. Probably the biggest changes, I would say, is some UI stuff. Just like in Windows 8, the start menu is gone. But also, they've added better integration with Hypervisor, which is good. I mean, Hyper-V started getting good in Server 2008.
And FreeBSD is now a Class 1 guest on Hyper-V.
Yeah, and in 2012, they've really taken a step further. The tools also have had a good refresh. The server, the thing that Microsoft's getting really good at is multi-server administration. Like their new server manager dashboard will pull up all of your servers in your domain, and it'll pull out all of the error events across the event logs in your domain, and it'll also bring out all of the running services across your domain, and then best practice analysis right here in your dashboard, and then finally it'll give you performance metrics for the last 24 hours of all of the servers in your domain now. Nice. All in this one dashboard, right? Just built right in now.
Yeah,
so that's
honestly,
pretty nice.
to get that 24-hour snapshot of performance, I had to do a lot of work myself to get that to happen for my BSD clusters.
Yeah. Now, your option is more flexible. It can be used across a wider range of devices and services and operating systems.
And over the internet and so on.
Right.
But
this is Server 2012 only, and you have to be using this MMC system to get to it. But it is nice that it automatically goes out there and gets this. It also, you can deploy new software features like make this a DNS server, make this a domain controller across your server just from one management console. You don't have to log into each server to do that kind of stuff. Oh, also kind of interesting, Alan, Server 2012 now by default, you install as a server core. The default selection is core mode, no GUI. and then
Right.
you have to change to graphical mode if you actually want to install Server 2012 with a GUI. It's not
Right,
the default
because
option.
most of the times you're going to manage it from your desktop
Yeah.
or laptop somewhere, not,
Right.
you know. I remember the days when I did this Windows NT4 when I worked at the power plant. Their server room was mostly tables with individual machines, each that had a monitor on it, right, and a keyboard in front of it. Nowadays, you could do this with them all in a rack, and you almost never use a keyboard, and you never interface with the machine directly. You just manage it over the network with, the management tools like that when the thing never has a GUI at all, or with something like RDP. But yeah, the advantage with that core thing is you're saving resources.
Yeah,
right? It's the same idea why we don't install X on a Linux server.
And it's part of the reason...
And it basically allows you to get a little bit more of that efficiency, especially when you're using it just as a hypervisor.
And with this management tool, you don't really need the GUI, since this by default will support all the servers on your network. And even you can even do things like through this server manager, volume management across your server, so you can slice up disk volumes and set up software RAIDs. Like here I'm showing a 5 terabyte RAID volume that's on this client's machine that I can set up completely headless, and it'll go out and it'll, from over the network, it'll partition the drive, add them to these volumes, put them all together, set up the RAID, and it's nice.
It's basically, in a lot of ways, catching up with the efficiency that you would get from using Linux or something instead of Windows.
Yeah.
As far as the amount of resources that are wasted by the OS compared to what is usable for what you're actually trying to do.
Yeah, it's if you're a Windows shop, Server 2012 looks like a pretty good product. I think with most of this stuff, though, if you're really using it in honest-to-goodness production, it might be worth waiting until it has Service Pack 1. I mean, why not? Like, I kind of got a little burned because when
it's probably going to take you that long to get around to upgrading everything anyway.
Oh, yeah, for sure, right? But I mean,
so
if you're going to deploy a server tomorrow, I'd say probably still go Server 2008 R2 if you're a Windows shop.
Yeah.
For now.
But basically, like the way we did it at the power plant, we had NT4, but almost the entire time I was there for 4 months as part of my placement in high school, was, I spent a lot of my time in the test lab where we had a bunch of the different client configurations and the servers and so on, all running Windows 2000, and we were testing stuff and building the scripts that would deal with installing the apps and so on. And, they spent months looking at Server 2000, Windows 2000, and how to integrate it into their network. They didn't just start installing new servers as Windows 2000.
I think something that is going to be interesting for small business and home users is Server 2012 Essentials, which actually isn't out yet, but is this one part replacement for Windows Home Server, but it's also still a full-blown Windows server that has some really interesting tie-ins with Azure. And they're sort of making like global sign-ons possible. They're making disk pooling between local storage and cloud storage possible. And they're making automatic PC backup and imaging all done just super crazy easy. So like the idea is that a small business might buy this thing out of the box. It'll set up all of their sign-ons. It'll do cloud syncing with that stuff. It'll do centralized document management, and it'll do PC imaging just with a few clicks of a button. And that, I think, if that all works, could be a really compelling product. If it kind of, doesn't, then...
It could also put people that do work like you did out of a job.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, exactly. It could. And
although, they still need someone that needs to manage the server. So it would just make your job a lot easier and maybe reduce your billable hours a little bit. But.
Possibly. I had seen this, and Microsoft's own numbers back this up, but Windows Home Server, that they killed, they were seeing much more deployment in the 10 to 15 user office than they were in actual people's homes.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So,
and they want to steer those people into the small business server or this thing like you're talking about that they have in 2012.
Yeah. And so this kind of stuff is interesting. With the new storage backend stuff, where you can do mix match drives, you can have storage, you can do things like in ZFS where you can overcommit, right? You can say it's actually a 15 terabyte volume when there's actually only 10 terabytes of physical storage, and then you can add disk to that pool to grow it to the actual committed storage space. A lot of stuff that you're seeing on ButterFS and ZFS is now making its way over to Windows, and they're using some new file system technology, which is kind of compelling. And when you combine that with their file system-wide snapshotting capabilities, it's still NTFS, it's still Windows Server, but at least they're trying to stay competitive up against FreeBSD and Linux file servers. So there you go. That's the mini review. What do you think of that?
That was pretty good. If people want more, it would be very helpful if you had a more specific question. You know, it's like rather than the whole OS, is there like a specific feature you would like us to dig into a little bit more instead of just saying, what's Windows Server 2012?
So, Alan, I say we just zed that question right up, and we basically move on to get on a boot to our next question. What do you say? I'm trying to get people drunk here, Alan. All right.
Sure.
This one's interesting. It came in from Bear5398. He says, Shoebox.com. Is it sufficient for personal documents? Shoebox is a service that takes receipts, business cards, and the like, scans them, and then makes them available on their cloud-based server. Probably a little bit like Evernote can do. But they actually will scan the products in. Then they either send you back the papers or shred and recycle them. I'm considering using their service to declutter my file drawers. Yeah, that does seem like that could be nice. And have had several years of old credit card receipts, tax returns, and other important papers that I might want to be able to refer to in the future. I understand I'm having human operators at any stage present security concerns in itself, as does using cloud-based services. But they purport to storing the data securely. But do these claims pass the TechSNAP with test?
Not necessarily. The first thing is I wouldn't trust a startup with anything you have to keep for 7 years. You know, what happens is a startup goes away after a year or 2 or 3 even. Then even if they offer you some way to get your records out, it could be a problem and you could end up, you know, being in violation of the fact that you're supposed to keep these records for 7 years. And the fact that, I sent them to some company on the internet to scan for me probably isn't going to cut it with the IRS.
Yeah. Now, you figure the flip side, though, is this company's business depends on their operation being legit and secure. And if it comes out that they're, you know, they have an employee pocketing something or something like that, that pretty much would put them out of business.
Yes, but is that
still a risk, is what you're saying. Yeah, exactly.
Now, you know, having them, the fact that they do the scanning for you makes it hard to suggest the alternative of scan it all yourself and then store it in an encrypted volume that you can then back up to a regular cloud service like the Amazon S3 or whatever.
Right.
Or actually, that won't probably make much sense to use the Glacier thing.
Or if you have it in TrueCrypt volume, put it in Dropbox. That way it's easy to get to or something. I don't know.
Yeah. And, well, you would likely want to put it in more than one of those so that if one of them does go away, you know, over the next 7 years, that you don't end up losing your files or whatever.
Here's the benefit to scanning it yourself. Assuming, like, if he was really going to get behind this and he went out and maybe got himself, like, there's those smart scanners. I don't know if you've seen those. They're specifically designed to scan this type of documentation.
Yeah, like, there's some that you can actually just, like, put a stack of documents on it and it will auto-feed them.
And see, now that's an upfront cost, but then, you know, you're controlling it yourself. And then the other thing is he's going to have more papers, right? So this would be a service he'd have to continually use. Whereas if he got it himself, he could just trickle feed it as he had new stuff to file.
Right. That's something I didn't think about with the shoebox thing is you'd send them a box of documents at a time. So sure, it would clean out your drawer, but your drawer would then get full again and you'd have to send them another box of stuff.
See, that seems like it's an ongoing
problem. You're not going to
problem.
send them a couple of receipts at a time.
Now, did you know, too, there's some services where you actually just have all your mail sent to them and they open it and scan it for you. You know, you could give them consent and all that kind of stuff. And then they digitally send it to you in, like, PDF form. And it came out they were using jail labor to do that. They were using prison labor to do the scanning and the sorting. So,
which is cheap, but probably not that secure.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, so you just got to weigh that. So there's, you know, we don't know since we haven't personally investigated this company, but it does kind of raise the hair on the back of my neck. And I think maybe for a long-term solution, just get a document scanner and then integrate with something like save it to a TrueCrypt volume. Look into what Evernote's encryption types are because Evernote's a great solution for this kind of stuff. What's nice about some of these services is they're offering search and index capabilities too. So 5 years down the road, you can go search for something and it just pulls it right up. And I understand how that's very nice to have. So Evernote might be something to look at.
But yeah, like honestly, my first concern with this service is more that they will actually manage to lose your data than that they will end up disclosing it.
I suppose that's very possible, right?
The fact that they might accidentally disclose it somehow with a security vulnerability or something is right up there is like my number 2 concern. But number 1 concern is actually that they'll, you know, improperly implement their backup system in some way and actually end up losing your data.
Right. All right, Alan.
Honestly, that's another problem with really strong cryptography is if they did it such that, you know, it was encrypted with a key that only you had somehow.
Yeah.
Like if they use asymmetric keys in some way and you generated the key and just gave them the public key and your documents and they would encrypt all of it to the public key so that only the private key did decrypt it. If you lose your key, which people do all the time, then they can't help you and you've lost it and your documents are gone. So the problem with really strong cryptography is that if you fail at your part of it, then you're locked out.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Alan, our next question comes from Justin. He wants to see if, here's another thing, see if it passes the sniff test. He writes, are 10-character passwords enough? Hi, Chris and Alan. I was going to sign up for an account with Vanguard.com, a financial institution. But one thing troubled me. Their maximum password length is 10 characters long. Isn't this relatively a short maximum password length for an institution that might be safeguarding one's life savings? Also, if they were properly salted and hashed, isn't it true that it shouldn't matter how many characters long a password is? Could this indicate a potential security vulnerability in their system? Thanks, and keep up the good work, Justin.
Yes, he was alerted by all the right things. 10 characters is a bit short. Honestly, something I complain about my bank, the password limit is 12 characters.
Why would you limit it? It's got to be a database field issue or what?
Because they are using an old-fashioned mainframe database still that has a fixed width field. So that also means they're storing the passwords in plain text. Now, they do a fairly good job about restricting access to that database so that, that doesn't end up getting leaked out or whatever. But, you should know better. You worked at a bank, right?
I do not
Right. But yeah, it's like, how have they not upgraded this thing by now?
Yeah. And it's
one of those... they you can't have very many types of special characters. Basically, if you ever see a site that's trying to limit what you can use in your password, it means they're not hashing it properly.
I'm impressed that we've had a lot of our audience that's emailed in and said, this doesn't look right. Or look, we've also gotten those emails where people have said, I did a password reset and they sent me my password in clear text. Can you believe these guys? I'm glad people are realizing. And it's good to pick up on the signals like that, because that's really the only defense as consumers we have, because it's all black box to us. So you have to watch for these signals. So good job, Justin.
People complaining about that stuff is the only way we're ever going to get it changed.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah.
So if you're a Vanguard.com customer, something to think about. All right, Alan.
But yeah, so 10 seems rather short. But even it's like, if they used hashing, then they could end up with the fixed width field would end up being more like 32 bytes or something. But every password works out to be exactly the same length. And then you don't end up with those null-padded passwords. Right. But who knows what the problem is.
Yeah, it's hard to say because, like I said,
it's very common with banks. I remember I have the same problem with verified by Visa.
Oh, gosh.
That password also has the 12-character limit.
I hate that thing.
And it's like, at least they do enforce you can't use the same password you use for your online banking account. So if somehow you ever got phished into giving away your verified by Visa password, it wouldn't also compromise your online banking account.
Well, so good catch, Justin. Good catch. All right, Alan. We have a good question from Chris R. I think he writes in. What do you think on this question? He says, "Hello, guys. I just want to know: is it a bad idea to use scripts?" And he gives us a link to a site that has a ton of great CentOS scripts to install / update a web server. What do you think, Alan? So is it risky to take the easy route out and use a script?
Yes and no. The disadvantage of using a script compared to something like Puppet, where you're using a manifest, is that if the script fails in the middle, it doesn't usually gracefully resume if you run it a second time. Whereas with something like Puppet, because it's checking each step and just like, is this the setup right? Yes or no, and then if no, then make this change. Where basically it knows what it should look like, and it's changing your system until it looks like the manifest. But the scripts, it depends on the source. Make sure you trust the source of who wrote the script, and who has access to modify the scripts. If they're just some script posted on some website somewhere, you might want to be careful about that. The nice thing about the scripts like that is usually they're fairly easy to read if you want to just skim it and make sure that everything makes sense.
And I kind of find setting stuff up on CentOS to be a bit of a bear, so I can appreciate wanting to automate a portion of it. Like Nginx is one of the options, automate Nginx deployment on CentOS.
Yeah. Basically, it's not a horrible idea, although you should be wondering why, if you need to do this a lot, you're not coming up with a more elegant solution.
Yeah, I would say that's it right there. Are you avoiding something, or do you just need to get something in place so that way you can get onto another piece of your work? And I would say, you definitely want to question if you want to deploy this in production.
It's not a bad idea. And some of these scripts that are basically an open source one that's been collaborated on by a bunch of people are more likely to have the things that we're missing if you try to write it yourself. Right? If you write it yourself, you're probably not going to worry as much about the error handling and some of the stuff.
Right.
Whereas when these scripts that are meant to be used by a bunch of people and on machines that they don't make the assumption that the machine's going to be in a certain state when you start, they're going to be a little more complete, and they might be better than something you would write yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these kind of scripts are probably your safer bets.
Then trying to write your own script.
Yeah.
But in general,
I'd still be nervous about putting something that a script set up in production.
Yeah. Basically, if you're doing it a lot, then why aren't you doing something even more than scripting? And if you're not doing it a lot, are you using the script just because you don't know how to do it yourself? Then the question is, do you actually understand everything that's happening?
Right.
So, yeah, basically, if it's a one-off, you might be better doing it yourself just for the learning experience. Even if doing it yourself basically involves opening up that script and stepping through it and just, following what it's doing and doing those steps. We're using it more like a to-do list.
It's probably well commented.
Yeah. So is it a bad thing to use scripts? Not necessarily. You just have to look at your motivation for it. Like if you're going to be setting this up for a whole bunch of machines and having it happen all the time, you might consider something a little more robust than a script. But in general, not necessarily a bad idea. Although honestly, as a sysadmin, I started my career by installing, customized versions of Apache and like custom compiled PHP with the GD module to generate images and stuff because people didn't know how.
Yeah. Yeah. You had to dig into it. Yep.
Yeah. And, these scripts replaced that. But in general, not necessarily a bad thing, no.
All right. So we have another Justin that emailed us in, and he says, Siemens has admitted to some of their issues. This has kind of been a reoccurring topic we've covered on the show. He says, awesome stuff, guys. Just wanted to make sure that you saw that Siemens came out with an actual response to the SSL key I extracted from their firmware. They ended up confirming. What's that? Oh,
yep, go
ahead. They ended up confirming what I said, and they found self-disclosed additional vulnerabilities in the product I targeted, as well as 2 other separate RuggedCom product lines. Huge success for everyone here, and in my opinion. I didn't have to go buy some crap off eBay. Siemens found it and is fixing security issues, and the end users are going to be safer than where they were before I started on this path. The ICS Cert's updated advisory is here, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes, as well as the Siemens advisory and their PDF. We'll have a link to that. Again, thanks for the coverage on this stuff. It's amazing to see this is of interest to people outside utility workers, and your comments on the RuggedCom and GarrettCom Vulnersoft from the past few weeks, as well as one of the one in April, have been great. You've opened my eyes to real-world impacts I hadn't considered. Best of all, though, is that your discussions are so understandable that I've used them to explain to my family what it is that I'm doing and why I'm in the news. Well, that's awesome. So, great work, Justin.
Which email is that?
That came into the I think it was in the through the contact form, one of the contact forms.
Yeah,
yeah. So
I'll have to look at that after the show.
Very cool email, and it's awesome to hear from somebody who was directly involved with that whole thing, and great to see Siemens responding too.
Yes.
We've talked about how critical fixing this infrastructure stuff is. Now it's up to the sysadmins to get these patches out there to this stuff. Mm-hmm. That's the next step. That's the next important part. All right, sir. I believe that was the last email I had this week, unless you have anything in your list. Did I miss any of them? No?
No.
Okay, I think that's the last one. Well, then,
so I had a little announcement thing.
Okay.
Related to a story that will be within the next 1 or 2 episodes of TechSNAP. I'm looking for people that are reasonably experienced PHP programmers, especially if they have experience with CodeIgniter framework, but that's not required, to help me build a new open source security project.
Very cool.
Specifically to deal with handling sensitive information disclosure in a safe and secure manner. Can't really say too much more about it just yet, but yeah, if you're interested in basically helping build an open source web service for dealing with the kind of stuff that we talk about on TechSNAP all the time, it would be helpful to have a couple of people to help me build it instead of building it all myself.
Should they email you?
Yes, you can email me at alan@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
There you go. So check that. That sounds awesome. And then also a reminder, we're collecting your suggestions for rookies. If there's something you wish the rookie, when they come into the marketplace, knew, maybe you're a sysadmin, maybe you're a network engineer, maybe you're a developer, and you're like, oh, why don't these guys know about this? Email those in TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or find the thread in our subreddit and add it to that discussion thread that's going on in there. And we'll be reading those in episode 80 when we're doing a tape ahead. There's also a thread over there where you could suggest the headlines that we'll break on our week off. So, all right, Alan. Well, I think that's all the feedback this week, so that must mean it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to check out on your own. And almost all of them are exclusively powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, are you ready for the roundup? I believe the first story is mine, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here it goes. Beast creators. Remember, we've talked about Beast on the show
Beast
before?
Was a specific type of attack against SSL.
Yeah, and they've developed a new SSL attack. Security researchers Giuliano Rezzero and Tai Dorong have released details of an attack on SSL and TSL last year, along with a tool that they called Beast. Okay, so we're familiar with that. Now they've got a new attack they're calling Crime. They say crime attack is based. I know. I kind of like it, actually.
Yep.
The crime attack is based on a weak spot in a special feature in TLS 1.0, but exactly what feature it is has not yet been revealed by the researchers.
I'm guessing because they're waiting for an OpenSSL patch to fix it.
Oh, wouldn't that be very good, guy of them? So
well,
there you go.
It's called responsible disclosure.
H Online has the full write-up if you guys would like
yes,
to catch
I didn't
that.
have time to go over that, and that's probably the only reason it wasn't a main story with much more coverage. So
well, it might be. You know,
get promoted
sometimes
to a main story.
Yeah.
Once I get to dig into it more.
Sometimes this has been the case. Is it hits the roundup, it goes on our radar, and then as the story develops, it makes it to a main topic. Do you want to cover this malicious Apache module injection?
Sorry,
iframe injection.
I stuck an extra story in that you haven't.
Oh, I didn't update the order.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go get it.
So I have a link here to Colin Percival, who used to be the security czar for FreeBSD, but he runs TarSNAP, which we talked about a little bit before.
That's what it is.
An encrypted. Basically, it's a remote backup system that encrypts the data before it leaves your computer, so that TarSNAP itself or Amazon, that they use as the back end, never have access to your data.
Right.
But it uses a deduplication system to avoid uploading files that are already on the cloud and so on. So a lot of people kept asking him why he didn't consider switching to Amazon's Glacier thing,
their new super cheap storage, but slow.
Yeah. And so he's wrote an article on his blog about some of the peculiarities with the pricing of Glacier and how for TarSNAP it would actually end up costing more money, even though it's significantly cheaper for storage.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
mostly having to do with the way that they price the accessing the data once you put it into Glacier. Getting it back out is kind of an issue.
Yeah, boy, definitely looks like it's an issue. Each month you contribute up to 5% of the data you store in Glacier for free. But then you go over that, you start getting some major fees, 5% fees. So, if he had customers...
Yeah, basically, if you want to get more than 5% of the average amount you stored in there per month out, then you start getting fees that add up very quickly. And it's not just based on the absolute amount, it's based on this like rolling daily average. It's all very complicated and almost un-Amazonian, as he put it, compared to the way they price everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, they often dial the stuff around for a little bit, so... all right, now, should I talk about this Apache module? This is kind of interesting. So we've talked about like sites that are running WordPress or old versions of Ples getting compromised and an iframe getting injected that way. Well, what happens when you actually have a module that's been compromised? You can then insert an iframe on every page that's hosted on that Apache server, and that's exactly what this blogger has, as he calls it, unmasked. It's a follow-up post that he's done talking about the possibility before, and now he's actually got demo code on how you can do it. So, pretty interesting idea. You have to have the module.
Managed to get root or similar access to a web server rather than going around and trying to modify each page on the server to make it return the iframe. You basically inject an Apache module that will add the iframe into the pages after the fact. And
that's easy peasy.
Especially if with a vulnerability of some kind of control panel like cPanel or Plesk or DirectMin or whatever, where you could basically, even without root access, cause it to write the data or to rewrite the config to load this module even without having root access. So, there's ways other than root access that you could end up causing this to happen. I've never heard of a case of it actually happening, but it is definitely an interesting thing to think about.
Now, this next story is about a GitHub outage that, in actuality, wasn't that big of a deal, but man, did developers take to Twitter and make a stink about it. GitHub was down for collectively about 20 minutes, what they call a major service outage I think it was yesterday? Tuesday, sorry. It was Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Of course, the issue is that 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, developers are trying to get their work done. It's not like when Twitter or Facebook goes down.
Especially that they're mostly trying to update from overnight and get started in the morning.
Real work. It's not like a status update or something. It's like real work.
It's not just that. Is that if it had happened at 10 o'clock, it wouldn't have been as bad because they would have already, especially since it's a distributed version control system, they would have already checked out their updates and been in the middle of working. But because it happened just as they were starting work, they couldn't get those updates.
Oh, it was worst case out. It was worst case. So, you feel bad for the GitHub guys because that's
Although, it kind of brings up the question is like, I thought the whole point of a distributed version control system, as opposed to doing something more centralized like SVN, is that if GitHub was down, it wouldn't matter.
They did post.
I've never really looked into Git because I'm happy with SVN.
It's funny they had funny status messages like our DB cluster is slowly recovering. Okay, performance will be impacted. Okay. Then they say unicorns are decreasing in frequency. What? So they were actively publishing the status, and they have it over. They have status.github.com where you can always go to check on the status of the GitHub service.
Because I'm going to have to look into Git and find out if I'm willing to live with it. Because I imagine if I start this open source project I talked about in the feedback section, that we'd use something like Git because that would allow people to do public pull requests and so on.
Well, okay, I'm jumping ahead in the roundup, but it kind of fits so well. I was going to make it a roundup item, but Shane Kufel, he's often in the chat room, has made an Android app for Jupiter Broadcasting. So we have a couple now. We've got Callisto, we've got Shane's, and we'll have a link to the GitHub repo because Shane has just added the Android app for Jupiter Broadcasting to GitHub. So if folks want to get involved, he's open sourced it over there, and this does like HLS streaming on Android and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a really cool app that Shane has posted on the on a GitHub repo, and we'll link to that in the show notes if you folks are interested. You could also just go search the Android Play Store for Jupiter Broadcasting. Thanks to Shane and not Brian for making those for us. All right.
Totally Mike in the chat room points out that Unicorn is actually the name of a backend service for Ruby.
That makes sense. I didn't even think of that. I was thinking of unicorns. I just thought they were being really funny, and that totally makes sense, though. All right, well, that's not as funny. Let's talk about something else that's not very funny. Guild Wars 2 suffered a 11,000 account password hack.
Well, not exactly. There was never a problem with Guild Wars itself.
Okay.
11,000 Guild Wars users were affected. So basically, some fan site of Guild Wars that a lot of people that were interested in Guild Wars signed up to was compromised. And from that password database, the attackers found 11,000 Guild Wars people who used the same username and password on the fan site as they did on the official Guild Wars site for their account.
I see. Which makes sense.
So
a lot of people
Guild Wars itself wasn't compromised, but 11,000 people learned the lesson to not use the same password for everything.
Those 11,000 people need to go watch my LastPass video.
Yes, they do.
Just saying. Should I talk about this Romney story? Just a follow-up from the Romney tax return story. So the quote-unquote hackers have taken to Pastebin to defend themselves against the claims in the media. They sound a little offended in their posts here, but I'll just point out a couple of interesting things. They go on to say that they were surprised that the media are holding the remember, Alan, you mentioned that they sent encrypted versions to the media?
Yep.
They were surprised that the media is holding on to these. They actually expected them to distribute them. They think maybe somebody doesn't want them public, so they have linked them available here. People can download them while it's still available, and then people have also been making torrents of that and magnet links. They also have corrected a few other things, but the thing I think is most interesting to say, what if no one is caught and full payment is made to you guys? They'll say, we'll just go away. We'll just go away. You'll never hear from us again. But they're pretty bold. They're giving away details in here. They're saying that more than one's involved, but not more than 20. I mean, I don't know. They're on here. It's either a hoax or they're stupid. I'm not sure.
Well, I think specifically that they want to be taken seriously, and whether it's just for the purposes of attention whoring, or if it's because they actually want to get paid, then it makes sense either way.
I guess so. All right. Should we talk about this BMW blank key vulnerability?
Yes. So this is one I added to the roundup. So they found that BMW cars that have been built since 2006 are actually vulnerable. Basically, they make this onboard computer that can program a blank key. And basically, only BMW garages are supposed to have them, but apparently they've started popping up on the internet and in the black market for people to buy. So in about 3 minutes, you can program the key to be able to start the target BMW.
Wow, that sucks.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and this is what's called a class break, in that it works against all of these BMWs that have the same security system.
Microsoft once again has. I don't know. Okay, if Microsoft has once again donned their superhero suit and has disrupted another botnet. The Microsoft heroes.
Yes, the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit got permission from, I forget which court it was, to disrupt a botnet that was basically built from computers sold from the compromised Chinese supply chain. So basically, they found that computers that are sold through the insecure Chinese supply chain, about 20 to 25% of them come pre-installed with malware. And most of them come pre-installed with pirated copies of Windows. But yes, included in the part of the thing is that they have the
what?
Sorry, I got lost for a second. Because basically, when they come in with pirated version of Windows, if they're doing that anyway, then yeah, they slip some spyware in there. In this case, a bunch of these computers that got bought end up being part of a botnet, and so the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit is trying to shut down this Nighthole botnet.
Wow.
And there's more stories in the link.
Yeah, so check it out. And you know what it really tells us is that until Linux has some good malware so that way these guys can make some money off it, you're never going to see Linux ship on PCs. They'll just ship pirated Windows instead. Instead of, well, they could put Ubuntu 12.04 on there. Nope, pirated Windows because we make money off the malware. I don't know. Yep. That's my suspicion. All right, Elmo, I think that's the whole show, yeah?
Yep.
All right, everyone. Well, so here's the details. If you want to get a hold of us, email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or use that contact form, or you can submit to links at techsnap.tv, and I invite you to join us live. We are live Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom, there you go. And you can do that over at jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for the audio stream, which is great for commuting or while you're sitting at your desk. And thank you to everyone who goes over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate and contributes directly to the network and helps these shows keep coming to you, keeps our ads to a minimum in all of our podcasts, and helps you support these shows directly. All right, Alan. Well, there you go. And it's 9 p.m. in the UK, according to Mr. Badger89, which...
Yes, because the UK during British summertime, which is their version of daylight savings time, is 1 hour... or plus 1 hour to UTC or GMT.
Yeah.
But that'll be over in a couple of weeks, right? I don't remember exactly when the time changes, but I remember it changes at a different time in Britain than it does in North America.
I know, it's painful. It's painful. I wish let's just all standardize on internet time, which is Unix time. Let's just all standardize.
Everything will run on UTC. It will make my life so much easier.
That would make things a lot easier, wouldn't it? So, all right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.